So, happy Resurrection Sunday. There's so much that we could say about resurrection, and this morning there are a couple of things that, as I've been mulling it, that I wanted to share. And I'm not going to talk for too long, but there are two particular things that I want to share. We're going to be looking at this passage shortly from Matthew chapter 28. You may or may not know how the church calendar works, but there's something called the lectionary, which is basically put together by the Anglican Church, and it means that over the course of 3 years you read through most of the Bible, and for every 3 years you come back to the same readings. And this year, on this lectionary, on the suggested readings, the Matthew version of the resurrection story is suggested, and I found it really interesting reading this particular version of it.
Yeah, I could do that, Caroline.
Brilliant, thanks, Stuart. So we'll do it in a moment. So if you could just mute yourself again for the moment, and then unmute. I'll tell you, Stuart, when it's
okay.
When your time comes. Great, thank you. So there are two things that I want to think about today in terms of resurrection. And the first is spending a little bit of time thinking about the nature of resurrection. So what do we actually mean by resurrection? Because for years, actually, I didn't really get it. And you might feel similarly. And I kind of think, well, I understand the Friday bit where Jesus dies for my sins, but the Sunday bit gets a bit weird, or it just doesn't really make sense to me. And it seems like good news, but I don't really know what that means. So we're going to look briefly at that. But then the Matthew 28 passage, I want to reflect on our posture as his people in light of the resurrection. So our posture as the church, our posture as followers of Jesus. And so we're going to come on to that shortly. So I don't know if any of you, this is a picture here of a blossom tree on the Plough roundabout. You can see in the background majestic wine. Has anyone else seen this? I'm actually not going to ask you to answer that out loud, but you might have seen this. There's a couple of these actually. They're stumps of trees. I think the gathering leadership team probably feel like I'm a little bit obsessed with these stumps, because I noticed them first last year. So obviously these blossom trees have been cut down. I don't know if you remember those prophetic words from Jerome and Michelle about our church being like a stump. But what was amazing was last year suddenly seeing that these blossom branches came bursting out of these stumps. And I'm just going to flick forward to this, a slightly better version. And this year I'm thrilled to see that these stumps have burst to life again. And it seems like a really good timing, because I think this is a really helpful picture of resurrection. So Jesus cut down, killed, but that's not the end of the story. There's life that comes out of the death. And with Jesus, the thing that I had always kind of misunderstood, for years I misunderstood this. I thought that Jesus, after he died and was raised again, I thought his being raised again just meant that he came back to life, that the blood started pumping in his body, his heart started pumping, that, you know, his cold and rigid fingers and limbs started moving again, and that he came back to life. But that's not what happened. It wasn't that he was resuscitated. And that's what we see happening to Jesus when he raises people from the dead, Lazarus or the girl, that they're sort of resuscitated, ultimately they die. Whereas with Jesus, it's that he went through death. He passed through death onto the other side and then was resurrected. And we know that Jesus was recognizable when he came back from the dead. So people could see that he had the marks in his hands and his feet and his side from his death. People knew it was Jesus. So he did have a body, but also his body defied the normal sort of laws of physics. So the story that we're going to read in a minute, it talks about the angel rolling back the stone. And that wasn't because Jesus was trapped inside and sort of knocking on the stone saying, "Let me out, I'm in here." Because his body, his resurrection body, didn't need the stone to be rolled away. He was already out of the grave. He was already out of that chamber. The stone being rolled away was just so that the people with human bodies could go in and see that he wasn't there. And so Jesus, we see after the resurrection appearing in lots of different ways, where he kind of suddenly appears and he hasn't opened the door. So his body, in one way, is recognizable, but in another, it's completely different. So, like it says, it defies the laws of nature, but also it's incorruptible, which means that he can never get an injury again. He can never break a bone, or there's nothing that's going to kill Jesus again. So this is what resurrection is. It is this transition to the incorruptible version of life, this immortal version of life. And so I want to take you to this famous passage. So 1 Corinthians chapter 15, if you're still kind of wrestling with this idea of what does resurrection mean, this is a brilliant passage to go to and to try to get to grips with, because it tells us so much about resurrection. My screen actually has just cut off the top of that, and it might have done the same for yours. So I'm going to turn my Bible to 1 Corinthians chapter 15. It talks here about those words that actually Kat was singing over us and quoting. So when the perishable has been clothed with the imperishable, and the mortal with immortality, then the saying that is written will come true. Death has been swallowed up in victory. It's been completely devoured. Death has been devoured by the victory of the resurrection. And so it can lead us to say, oh, death, where is your victory? Where, oh, death, is your sting? So basically the power has been taken out of death. The pain has been taken out of death. That's not to say that we don't feel sad, we don't grieve when people die physically, but it means that it no longer has the final word. Death no longer has a final word, just like this tree that's been cut down that blooms and can't be stopped from blossoming. That's what the resurrection is. It's this eternal, immortal, irrepressible life. And so that death that doesn't have the final word is for all of us who are in Christ Jesus. And there's another brilliant phrase from that chapter where it talks about Jesus being the first fruits from among the dead, or in the NLT, which is a slightly more readable translation, it says that Christ has been raised from the dead. He's the first of a great harvest of all of those who've died, which means that Jesus is like the foretaste. He's the front runner. There's going to be this enormous harvest of people who have trusted Jesus, whose lives are in his. So for you and I, for those of us who know Jesus, what Jesus has experienced, this immortal, resurrected life, is a taste of what we're going to experience. There's a promise in Scripture that we're going to be raised with him. And so Jesus' resurrection is also a guarantee of our resurrection. And it's not just a guarantee of our personal resurrection and, oh, well, good for us. It's also a guarantee of the resurrection of creation, of God's good creation, as the promise of the new heavens and the new earth. And so when we look at issues in the world that we might be concerned about, particularly things like climate change, we can have hope. It's not to say that we don't take care of the world. It's not to say that we don't do our bit in stewarding creation. But when we hear stories about the kind of doom and gloom of this is it, this is the end, if this is it, the end, if this is it, then that's in God's good purposes, because he promises resurrection for the whole of creation. So we're thanking God for what he's done in Jesus and his resurrection, but we're taking it for ourselves, and we're taking this as hope for the whole of creation. So I hope that you find that kind of exciting, because actually we need to get hold of this. And if we don't really understand it, 'cause it gives us a whole different perspective on life. It gives us a whole different perspective on, hang on, there's some chat going on here. Oh, right, some amens, that's right. I thought you were going to say, I can't hear you or something. Yeah, if we don't understand this, then we're going to have our perspective completely off. And we're not going to understand how to read the world and how to understand the events that we find ourselves in right now, but the events of suffering and difficult situations in the world. Now, I want to move on to think next about our posture. And Stuart, I wonder if now you could read that passage, please. So Matthew 28.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so Matthew 28, 1 to 10. After the Sabbath, as the first day of the week was dawning, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to see the tomb. And suddenly there was a great earthquake. The angel of the Lord, descending from heaven, came and rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothing white as snow. For fear of him, the guards shook and became like dead men. But the angel said to the women, "Do not be afraid. I know that you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He's not here, for he has been raised, as he said. Come and see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples, he's been raised from the dead, and indeed he's going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him. This is my message for you." So they left the tomb quickly with fear and great joy and ran to tell his disciples. Suddenly, Jesus met them and said, "Greetings." And they came to him, took hold of his feet and worshipped him. Then Jesus said to them, "Don't be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee. There they will see me."
Thanks, Stuart. There's so much in this story that we could reflect on, and I'd encourage you this week to read. There's just 10 verses, but it's really helpful reading different gospel accounts of the resurrection, because you get a kind of slightly different perspective each time. So just to summarise, it's that Mary, the mother of Jesus, and Mary of Magdalene, they're there in the garden. They've gone to possibly anoint the body, to go there and be near where Jesus is buried, and they encounter this very scary angel. So scary that it has the effect that these Roman centurions, these hard guys, like they're really tough soldiers, these Roman centurions, it says they fall down like they're dead. They're so scared, they're trembling, they're shaking, they faint with fear. And this scary angel says to the women, "Don't be afraid, Jesus has been raised from the dead. Go and tell the disciples that they've been raised." And so it's when they're on their way to go and tell the disciples this good news that Jesus actually appears to Mary and to Mary. And it says that Mary, the two Marys, they go to Jesus. And in my version, which is the NIV version, it says, Jesus says, "Greetings. They came to him, they clasped his feet and worshipped him." And this phrase, "they clasped his feet and worshipped him," has been the thing which has really sort of caught my attention this week. So I've read this story lots of times, and like I said, different things kind of catch your eye, but they clasped his feet and worshipped him. I don't know, this picture that I put on the screen, it's almost a bit like you're intruding on an intimate moment, isn't it? But their reaction is to go to him and to grab hold of him. And so there's a couple of things here. So I was talking about the posture, our posture post-resurrection, our posture as a church, our posture as individuals when we discover the resurrected Jesus. And the first for them is that they fall on their knees in worship. Worship of Jesus, worship for who he is. And I was thinking, you can't clasp someone's feet standing up. Even if you do a lot of yoga, clasping someone's feet while you're stood up is going to involve you bending down. It's going to involve you quite possibly getting on your hands and knees to hold Jesus' feet. And so that posture there of being people when we encounter the resurrected Jesus as being those who get on our knees and hold the feet of Jesus. In recent weeks, I've been sort of talking to God about just asking him, what's this pandemic about? What does this mean for the church? And I've not had a lot of answers. And I imagine a lot of us haven't had a lot of answers, and probably it'll be in years to come that we realise the significance of this time. But one of the images that God has given me about the church is that, I felt him saying that this is a time of us receiving new fire and new water. And this isn't just for us as the gathering, but us as the church worldwide, new fire and new water. And I've not quite understood exactly what that means, but I sense that the fire thing is about us being refined. It's about us coming back to that simple place of worship, of the distractions being stripped away. I don't know if you know that worship song, Coming Back to the Heart of Worship, where it talks about all this other stuff being stripped away, and to just you really get down to the basics. And I think for us, one of the fundamental things is worship. And at the gathering, we don't have a lot of distractions anyway. Things are already pretty simple. But I really sense that this is a call for us when we are able to gather again physically, is to prioritise that place of worship and bowing at Jesus' feet, bowing to the resurrected Jesus. And this is maybe for us to get practicing that while we're in a situation where we can't be together physically, but to spend time at the feet of Jesus. The other thing that has kind of caught my attention is this word clasping. So they didn't just hold on or touch his feet, but they clasped his feet. This word in Greek is krateo. And this word is used all through the New Testament, actually. It's used in lots of different circumstances. When Jesus was arrested, he was krateoed. He was seized. He was taken. But it also talks about, this word is also about laying hold of, kind of grabbing onto. And so they came to Jesus and they grabbed onto him, or they seized him, they clasped him. And this is something that I think is a challenge for us as his followers, that we don't just hear the story of the resurrection and think, oh, that's interesting, but we grab hold of it, kind of make it our own, understand it, appropriate it for ourselves, and don't let go of it. We don't let go of it, even when things seem uncertain or confusing, or when we are going through times of suffering or hardship, or when the people we love are going through times of suffering and hardship, that we hold on with everything that we've got. And it's so interesting that Naomi used that phrase from Hebrews, because I've got the same one here at the end of that video with us holding up our pictures. This encouragement from the writer of Hebrews, and this word hold unswervingly is krateo. It's the same as the women clasping Jesus' feet, is holding unswervingly. So the writer in Hebrews says, let us draw near to God with a sincere heart and with the full assurance that faith brings, and let us hold unswervingly to the hope that we profess. For he who promised is faithful. And I believe that this is God's encouragement to us, particularly during this time, but in an ongoing way. In fact, in the book of Revelation, when there's the angel of the church writing to different churches, so often, again, it's that same word, krateo. The thing that they are being praised for is holding on, standing firm, being immovable in their hope in Christ. And so I wonder if that's what the angel of the church in North Leatherhead would be saying to us. Hold on, hold unswervingly, clasp, grip, don't let go of this hope of the resurrection. Because not because of our faithfulness, but because of his. He who promises is faithful. And so I just want to finish really by thinking about what does that actually look like in practical terms, us holding on. And first of all, it is for us in our personal life, having that perspective of the resurrection and seeing things through that lens, and us holding on to that as our major lens that we see the world through. But also for us as a community, it's thinking, kind of viewing the world through this understanding that death is not the end. Death does not have the final word. And so I was thinking, I've been finding this week in my prayer life, or in the recent weeks, so when I was praying for Tristan, I texted Rachel and told this, there were really indignant, angry prayers that I was praying for Tristan, because I was saying, God, this is not okay. This is not okay. I don't want death to have the final word here. And when we're praying for that little boy who's in hospital, again, I found myself this indignation rising up in me, saying, this is not acceptable. Death does not have the final word here. It also means, I think, walking with people and being in our community for the long haul. So often we see suffering, we see injustice, and we maybe even see physical death. But sticking around long enough, so having the perspective, holding the perspective that does not have the final word, and sticking around long enough to see redemption, to see signs of resurrection. I was thinking of River Lane, that it's a story, isn't it, of being there for the long haul and seeing what seems like death after death and failure after failure. And then finally, after, I don't know, was it 11 years, really long time, and particularly thinking of Jenny and your faithfulness here, but finally we see life. Finally we see Jesus' yes. And so we're called to be these people who are stubborn in our pursuit of life, who are stubborn in our belief that resurrection is a possibility here on earth, and holding unswervingly to that idea that we can see life come from death, that even if we see death on this side of eternity, there will be resurrection in the age to come. And so it's engaging with the suffering and the pain of this world, but also believing in the resurrection from the dead when God will restore all things. So I want to end there, and just to leave us, I guess, with that idea that we are called to be the ones who bow at the feet of the resurrected Jesus, to worship him our whole hearts, and to be those who hold unswervingly, stubbornly to the hope we profess.